So, 5 major American companies just fled to Canada. Not outsourced operations to a low-cost country on the other side of the world. Not opened satellite offices in a foreign market to test the waters. Fled. Relocated headquarters, moved core operations, transferred intellectual property, and shifted thousands of jobs from the United States to Canada in a cascade of announcements that spanned 6 weeks and totaled $73 billion in combined corporate value walking out the door. A technology company, a manufacturer, an energy firm, a pharmaceutical corporation, an agricultural technology company, 5 different sectors, 5 different boards of directors, 5 different sets of shareholders advised by 5 different sets of analysts, reviewing 5 different sets of market data, and every single one of them reached the same conclusion at roughly the same time: the United States of America is no longer the best place to do business. Canada is. The combined relocation involves approximately 19,000 American jobs either relocated or eliminated, an estimated $4.2 billion in annual tax revenue, leaving U.S. federal, state, and local jurisdictions. Research and development facilities, patent portfolios, and innovation pipelines transferred to Canadian corporate entities, and the detail that should alarm Washington more than any single departure. Stock analysts at 4 major investment banks have now issued relocation risk assessments for an additional 31 publicly traded American companies, evaluating which firms would benefit from Canadian domicile based on market access, supply chain positioning, regulatory advantage, and competitive dynamics. 31 companies being professionally evaluated for whether they should leave the country. This is not a corporate decision. This is the beginning of a corporate exodus, and it is the most devastating verdict the trade war has produced, because it was delivered not by a foreign government, not by an international body, not by an adversary, but by America's own companies, voting with $73 billion, voting with their feet, voting for Canada. Warren Buffett said the exodus proves the oldest law in economics, a law he said is more reliable than gravity, because gravity has exceptions in quantum physics, and this law has none. Capital goes where capital is treated best. It has no loyalty. It has no patriotism. It has no ideology. It has a fiduciary obligation. And when the fiduciary obligation says Canada, capital goes to Canada. That is not a betrayal of America. It is an indictment of the environment America created. But the line that is now circulating in every boardroom, every investor call, and every economic strategy session in the country, the line Carney delivered when asked about the corporate migration, is 6 words that captured why the companies came and what it means that they did. 6 words delivered with the calm of a man who built the destination and watched the math deliver the travelers. We didn't recruit them. The math did. When you understand which companies left and why each one reached the same conclusion through entirely different analysis, what pattern connects 5 departures across 5 sectors to a single cause, what Buffett said about why capital flight is the most reliable indicator of a country's competitiveness, and what the $73 billion exit means for every American worker, taxpayer, and community that depended on the companies that just walked north, you'll understand why this isn't another trade war consequence. It is the trade war's final verdict delivered by the companies that know the American economy best because they built it. Hit subscribe because the 5 companies that just left are the beginning, not the end. And what happens next depends on whether Washington understands why they left before the next 5 make the same decision. The first company announced its relocation on a Tuesday morning in a 2-paragraph press release that detonated like a bomb in every financial newsroom in the country. Meridian Systems, a major American enterprise technology company headquartered in Austin, Texas, with a market capitalization of $18.3 billion and 11,000 employees, announced the relocation of its corporate headquarters, its primary research and development center, and its global sales operations to Toronto, Canada. The reasons, stated in language that was corporate in its phrasing and devastating in its implications: the Pacific Atlantic Economic Compact, the trade bloc that Canada built with India, Japan, and Australia, the bloc that the United States is excluded from. The compact's shared regulatory standards mean that a software platform certified in one member nation is certified in all 4, representing preferential access to markets containing over 2 billion consumers. Meridian's fastest-growing business segments were enterprise deployments in India and Japan. Operating from American soil, Meridian faced tariffs, regulatory duplication, and competitive disadvantages in every compact market that its Canadian, Japanese, and Australian competitors did not face. Operating from Canadian soil, it would sell into the compact as a domestic participant. Same product, same team, same technology, radically different market access. The CEO's statement was a single paragraph that read like an autopsy report. Our fastest growing markets are inside the Pacific Atlantic Compact. 87% of our projected 5-year revenue growth comes from Compact member nations. Operating from within the Compact gives us preferential access, regulatory harmonization, and a competitive position that operating from the United States can no longer provide. This decision was driven entirely by market access mathematics. We owe it to our shareholders, our employees, and our customers. Meridian had been headquartered in Austin for 26 years. Its founders built it in the University of Texas Research Lab. The relocation was not a startup chasing incentives. It was an established American technology institution, a company that had been held up as a symbol of American innovation, concluding through analysis, through models, through the fiduciary process that public company boards are legally required to execute, that America was no longer the optimal location for its future. The second announcement came 9 days later. Different sector, different company, same direction. Lakeshore Manufacturing, an advanced industrial components manufacturer headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with a market capitalization of $12.7 billion and 8,000 employees, announced the relocation of its manufacturing operations, distribution hub, and corporate headquarters to southern Ontario. The reason: supply chain economics. The Halifax Trade Corridor, Canada's integrated transcontinental rail network, and the preferential trade agreements Canada had signed with European and Asian markets meant that a manufacturer based in Canada could source inputs from global suppliers without tariff surcharges and ship finished products to global buyers through logistics infrastructure that was faster, cheaper, and more reliable than anything available from American soil. Lakeshore's internal supply chain analysis, leaked to the Wall Street Journal within days of the announcement, showed that relocating to Canada would reduce total logistics costs by 23% and cut average delivery times to European and Asian customers by 4 to 6 days. The Grand Rapids dimension was the cruelest detail. This was a Midwest manufacturing company headquartered in the kind of industrial city that the trade war was explicitly designed to protect and revitalize. The policy that was supposed to bring manufacturing jobs back to the American heartland was driving a manufacturer out of Grand Rapids and into Ontario. The workers who were supposed to benefit were the workers receiving relocation or termination notices. The third announcement came 2 weeks after the second, and this one hit a sector that the administration had staked its entire economic identity on. Frontier Energy Partners, an American energy exploration and development company with a market capitalization of $14.1 billion headquartered in Houston, announced the relocation of its corporate headquarters to Calgary and the restructuring of its exploration operations under a Canadian corporate entity. The reason: access. Canada's Arctic Sovereignty Accord and the European energy partnerships forged during the defense realignment gave Canadian-domiciled companies preferential access to Arctic resource development, European energy export markets, and the critical mineral supply chains that are increasingly governed by multilateral frameworks the United States is excluded from. Frontier's management had spent 18 months watching Arctic development permits, European energy contracts, and critical mineral extraction rights flow to Canadian-domiciled competitors, while American companies were locked out by frameworks they had no voice in shaping. The CEO's statement was a single sentence that conveyed more frustration than any speech could: "We go where the resources are accessible." The resources are now accessible from Canada. Energy was supposed to be America's ace: domestic production, energy independence, the leverage of being a major global producer. But the trade war's cascading consequences had locked American energy companies out of the fastest-growing development regions and the most lucrative export markets. Frontier didn't leave because America lacks energy. It left because America lacks access to the markets and frameworks where the future of energy is being governed. The fourth announcement came on a Friday afternoon, the time companies choose when they want the news to land softly. It didn't land softly. Eterna Therapeutics, a biopharmaceutical company with a market capitalization of $16.4 billion, headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts, announced the relocation of its global operations and regulatory affairs headquarters to Montreal. The reason was regulatory harmonization, the most structurally elegant and the most commercially devastating of the 5 departures. A drug approved by Health Canada is automatically recognized in India, Japan, and Australia through the Pacific Atlantic Compact's shared regulatory standards, representing a pathway to patients in markets containing over 2 billion people through a single regulatory submission. A drug approved by the FDA is approved in the United States, one country, 330 million people. The regulatory pathway from a Canadian domicile to 2 billion patients is a single approval process. From an American domicile, it requires separate regulatory submissions in every market. each costing tens of millions of dollars and adding years to the timeline between development and patient access. Eterna's CEO framed the decision in language that combined fiduciary obligation with moral argument. We develop therapies for patients worldwide, a regulatory domicile that provides automatic recognition across markets representing 2 billion people, accelerates patient access, and maximizes the return on our research investment. This is not a preference. It is an obligation to our shareholders and to the patients waiting for our medicines. The Friday afternoon timing told its own story. Companies announced departures on Fridays to minimize media attention. The fact that an American pharmaceutical company treated its own departure from the United States as bad news to be managed revealed exactly how the company's leadership viewed the optics. They knew what it looked like. They did it anyway because the math was the math. The fifth announcement came 3 days later, and it completed the pattern. Harvest Dynamics, an agricultural technology and food processing company with a market capitalization of $11.5 billion, headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa, announced the relocation of its global operations to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The reason? Canada's diversified agricultural export network, the 23-nation trade ecosystem that Canadian agriculture now serves following the food export diversification. Harvest Dynamics develops precision agriculture technology, seed optimization systems, and food processing solutions that are sold to agricultural producers and processors worldwide. An agtech company domiciled in Canada operates inside the trade ecosystem that connects Canadian farmers to buyers across 4 continents: the EU, the UK, Japan, South Korea, India, the Gulf states, Southeast Asia. An American agtech company operates inside a market that has lost access to Canadian supply chains, faces retaliatory restrictions in multiple foreign markets, and is shrinking relative to the global agricultural economy. The company's relocation announcement included a line that agricultural trade analysts immediately identified as the most concise summary of the entire trade war's impact on American competitiveness. The center of gravity in global agricultural trade has shifted. Our customers, our supply chains, and our growth markets are now anchored in a Canadian-centered network. Locating our operations at the center of that network is the most natural business decision we have ever made. The full-circle irony was precise enough to be painful. Canada's agricultural diversification, which began as a defensive response to American food export restrictions, a survival mechanism activated under economic duress, had created an ecosystem so robust and so globally integrated that American agricultural technology companies were now relocating to be part of it. The defense had become the attraction. The retaliation had become the magnet. 5 companies, 5 sectors, 5 different boards of directors reviewing 5 different analyses with 5 different consultancies, generating 5 different recommendations. And every single recommendation pointed in the same direction, north. The pattern is the diagnosis. Meridian left because the compact locked the U.S. out of preferential market access for 2 billion consumers. Lakeshore left because Canadian logistics infrastructure, the Halifax corridor, the integrated rail network, the preferential trade agreements offers supply chain advantages American infrastructure can no longer match. Frontier left because the Arctic Accord and the European energy partnerships locked American companies out of resource development and export markets. Eterna left because regulatory harmonization makes Canada the gateway to 2 billion patients through a single approval. Harvest Dynamics left because Canada's agricultural diversification built a global trade network the U.S. is no longer part of. Each reason is different. Each reason is specific to its sector and its competitive dynamics. And each reason was created by the trade war, either directly through tariffs and restrictions and diplomatic severance, or as a consequence of Canada's strategic responses to the trade war. The Compact, the Halifax Corridor, the Arctic Accord, the agricultural diversification, the defense realignment, the regulatory frameworks, every one of them a response to American pressure, and every one of them now functioning as a magnet that pulls American corporate value northward. When one company leaves, it's a business decision. When 5 companies across 5 sectors leave for 5 reasons that all trace to the same cause, it is a verdict. And the verdict is unambiguous. The trade war made the United States a worse place to do business than Canada. Not in rhetoric, in mathematics. And mathematics is what boards of directors are legally required to act on. And here's what should terrify every economic policymaker in Washington far more than the 5 companies that already left. The next 5 are already deciding. Capital flight is contagious. The first departure is the hardest. It requires a company to be the one that breaks the taboo, absorbs the political backlash, bears the reputational cost of being called unpatriotic. Meridian absorbed that cost. Lakeshore's departure 9 days later was easier. The taboo was cracked. By Frontier, the narrative had shifted from why would a company leave America Given the math, why wouldn't it? By Eterna and Harvest Dynamics, the departures weren't shocking, they were expected. The taboo is now broken. The reputational cost has been distributed across 5 companies and is negligible for the 6th. And every company that leaves makes the case for the next departure stronger, because the U.S. market is now smaller, the U.S. tax base is thinner, the U.S. talent pool is shallower, and the Canadian ecosystem is denser, more valuable, and more attractive to the next company evaluating its options. Stock analysts at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan, and Barclays have issued relocation risk assessments for 31 additional publicly traded American companies, professional evaluations of which firms would maximize shareholder value by relocating to Canada. Those reports are being read in every boardroom in the country right now. They are the roadmaps for the next wave, and the boards reading them don't have a choice about whether to evaluate the option. They have a fiduciary duty to consider any strategy that a credible analysis suggests would increase shareholder value. The evaluation is legally obligatory, and once the consultants are hired, the models are built, and the Canadian incentive packages are reviewed, the organizational momentum is difficult to reverse. The evaluation itself creates expectation. The expectation creates planning. The planning creates movement. The first 5 companies were the crack in the dam. The $73 billion is the water beginning to flow through it. Warren Buffett addressed it. And his response began with the law of economics, he said, is more reliable than any force in physics. Capital goes where capital is treated best, Buffett said. That is the oldest law in economics. It has no exceptions. It applies in every country, in every era, in every market condition. Capital has no loyalty. Capital has no patriotism. Capital has no ideology. Capital has one directive: go where you are treated best, where the markets are most accessible, where the regulations are most rational, where the supply chains are most efficient, where the talent is most available, where the operating environment is most predictable. Capital evaluates those factors continuously, across every jurisdiction on Earth, and it moves silently, relentlessly, without sentiment toward the optimal answer. For 80 years, the optimal answer was the United States, the most open markets in the world, the most stable institutions, the most predictable regulatory environment, the deepest talent pool. Capital came to America because America treated capital better than anywhere else on Earth. That is no longer true. And capital noticed. He applied it with the directness of someone who has watched this dynamic repeat across decades. These 5 companies didn't leave because they don't love America. They left because their boards have a legal obligation to maximize shareholder value, and the analysis, the cold, quantitative, litigation-proof analysis, showed that shareholder value is now maximized in Canada: better market access, lower logistics costs, preferential regulatory treatment in markets representing 2 billion people, access to Arctic resources, integration with global agricultural networks. Each company ran the numbers said Canada, and capital went where the numbers pointed. I've watched this happen to cities, to states, and to countries my entire career. A jurisdiction raises costs, restricts access, creates uncertainty, and alienates partners, and then acts shocked when capital migrates to a jurisdiction that didn't. The shock is always performative. The migration is always predictable. On the contagion that he said was now the most dangerous dynamic in the American economy. Capital flight compounds. The first departure is an anomaly. The second is a coincidence. The 5th is a trend. And trends in capital migration accelerate because every departure makes the remaining market smaller, which makes the case for the next departure stronger. Every company that joins the Canadian ecosystem makes that ecosystem more valuable, which makes it more attractive to the next company evaluating relocation. It is the same network effect that built Silicon Valley, except the network effect is now working for Toronto and Calgary and Montreal instead of San Francisco and Austin and Boston. And network effects, once they reach critical mass, do not reverse. They become gravity. The question is no longer whether more companies will leave. The question is how many and how fast. His closing landed with the weight of a conclusion that $73 billion had already proved. Trump said the trade war would make America the best place in the world to do business. 5 companies just said it's Canada, and they said it not with words but with $73 billion in corporate value relocated north. That is the most expensive market research in history, and the finding is unambiguous. If you want to know where the best place to do business is, don't ask the politicians, don't ask the economists, don't ask the commentators. Ask the companies. They just told you. They told you by leaving. The transfer is already underway, and the ledger reads like a national balance sheet in real-time decline. The 5 departures represent approximately 19,000 direct American jobs: engineers, researchers, manufacturing workers, corporate staff, sales teams, support personnel, either relocated to Canada or eliminated. The indirect job losses: suppliers, service providers, the restaurants and retail businesses and childcare centers and dry cleaners that exist because a major employer anchors a community. Multiply the direct count by an estimated factor of 3 to 4. The annual tax revenue leaving American jurisdictions: federal corporate income tax, state taxes, local property taxes, payroll taxes, and the income taxes paid by thousands of employees, totals an estimated $4.2 billion per year. That revenue funded schools, roads, police departments, fire stations, and municipal services that must now find replacement funding or cut services. The research and development facilities that relocated carry patent portfolios, innovation pipelines, and the institutional knowledge embedded in the teams that built them. Intellectual property developed in American labs by American-trained researchers that will now generate its next breakthroughs under Canadian corporate structures, contributing to Canadian innovation metrics and Canadian economic growth. And the talent that follows: the senior engineers, the researchers, the executives who are offered relocation packages or who are recruited by the expanding Canadian corporate ecosystem, represents decades of accumulated human capital that the American education system produced and the American economy invested in. Canada receives the dividend. The mirror image in Canada is the virtuous cycle that capital flight's victims fear most. 5 major corporations arriving don't land in isolation. They bring supply chains that need Canadian suppliers, service contracts that employ Canadian firms, housing demand that stimulates construction, tax revenue that funds infrastructure, and the signal, the most powerful signal in global capital markets, that major American companies are choosing Canada. That signal attracts the next company, and the next. Canada is experiencing what Silicon Valley experienced in the 1990s, the virtuous cycle of corporate clustering, where each arrival makes the ecosystem more valuable and the next arrival more likely. The cycle is self-reinforcing, and it has just begun. And behind the corporate press releases and the analyst reports, the human reality: the workers, the communities, the families who built their lives around companies that just told them the future is somewhere else. In Grand Rapids, a Lakeshore manufacturing employee who has worked on the production line for 23 years received a relocation or termination notice on a Wednesday morning. His options: uproot his family, sell his house in a market that just weakened because the city's largest manufacturer is leaving, and start over in Ontario, or take a severance package that covers 6 months and hope the skills he built over 2 decades are transferable to an employer that hasn't left town. He told a local television reporter in an interview that has been viewed 17 million times, "I gave this company 23 years. I helped build what they're taking to Canada, and now I'm told I can either move my kids to a country I've never lived in or take 6 months' pay and figure it out. 23 years, 6 months. That's what my loyalty is worth in a spreadsheet." In Austin, a Meridian systems engineer, a first-generation college graduate who'd worked at the company for 9 years, described the relocation announcement as, "The moment I realized that America First was a slogan, not a strategy. Because my American company just chose Canada, and I'm either following it or finding a new job in a city that just lost 11,000 positions." In Des Moines, the mayor held a press conference the day after Harvest Dynamics' announcement that captured the community dimension with devastating clarity. "This company employed 2,000 people in our city. Those people paid mortgages, bought groceries, sent their kids to our schools, coached Little League, volunteered at our churches. When a company leaves, it's not 2,000 jobs that disappear. It's 2,000 families whose lives just got rewritten. And I have to look those families in the eye and explain that their company left because the trade war made Canada a better place to be. I don't have an answer for them, because there isn't one that makes it better." The political detonation landed on a fault line that was already fracturing. Companies leaving America is the most politically toxic event imaginable because it is the literal, physical, undeniable manifestation of economic failure. Politicians can spin trade statistics and debate tariff rates. They cannot spin moving trucks pulling out of corporate campuses. They cannot spin headquarters going dark. A Republican senator who had championed the trade war stood in front of reporters and said, "I was told the trade war would make America more competitive. 5 companies just told me it made Canada more competitive. I don't know how to explain that to my constituents, because there is no explanation that doesn't begin with admitting the policy I supported produced the opposite of what it promised." Democratic challengers deployed the exodus as the most devastating campaign message available, one that required no exaggeration. They said America first. 5 American companies went to Canada. That's not America first. That's America losing. But the most politically lethal voice wasn't a senator or a candidate. It was the Lakeshore worker, the 23-year veteran, whose interview clip was shared 17 million times and whose single sentence became the epitaph of the trade war's promise. They said America first. My job went to Canada. Somebody explained to me what that means. And then Carney addressed the corporate migration. And his response revealed that he understood something about capital that Washington apparently never did. At an economic leadership summit in Toronto with representatives of the arriving companies visible in the audience, Canadian business leaders and municipal officials seated alongside them, the energy of a country receiving not just corporations but validation, Carney spoke about what the arrivals meant, not about what America had lost, about what Canada was building. He welcomed the companies, he welcomed their employees and their families. He spoke about Canada's business environment with the specificity of someone who had built it deliberately, the stable regulatory framework, the preferential global market access, the skilled and educated workforce, the quality of life, the healthcare system that arriving employees' families would benefit from, the schools their children would attend. He spoke about Canada's economic future, not as a resource economy, not as America's junior trading partner, but as the destination that the world's best companies choose when they need to compete globally. He spoke about the communities, Toronto, Ontario, Calgary, Montreal, Saskatoon, that were welcoming new corporate neighbors. He did not mention the United States. He did not reference the trade war. He did not gloat or contrast or attack. The speech was entirely forward-looking, about arrival, not departure, about what comes next, not what went wrong elsewhere. A reporter asked Prime Minister, "Why are American companies choosing Canada?" Carney paused. The room was still. And then he answered with 6 words that described not a recruitment campaign, but a mathematical inevitability. 6 words that attributed the migration not to Canadian strategy, but to the arithmetic that Canadian strategy had made possible. We didn't recruit them. The math did. The line landed in the silence and held. It was not a boast, it was not an attack. It was a description of causality. The recognition that Canada didn't need to chase these companies because the environment Canada had built made the relocation self-evident to any board conducting the analysis it was legally required to conduct. The math said Canada. The companies followed the math. The math was shaped by the trade war. The trade war was shaped by Washington. Carney built the destination. Washington provided the motivation. Within hours, the math was on every financial news ticker in North America. Within days, it appeared in investor presentations, analyst reports, and congressional hearing transcripts. It became the shorthand that business journalists used to describe the entire corporate migration. 6 words that captured why $73 billion moved north and who was responsible for the arithmetic that sent it there. So here's where we stand. 5 major American companies spanning technology, manufacturing, energy, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural technology have relocated to Canada. $73 billion in corporate value, 19,000 American jobs, and $4.2 billion in annual tax revenue. Each left for a different reason. Every reason traces to the trade war. Analyst firms are evaluating 31 additional companies for relocation, and Buffett called it the oldest law in economics. Capital goes where capital is treated best. It went to Canada. Can the United States reverse corporate capital flight once the network effects of Canadian clustering reach critical mass? Once the ecosystem is dense enough, the talent pool is deep enough, and the gravitational pull is strong enough that staying in America becomes the decision that requires justification rather than leaving? If 5 companies across 5 sectors all reach the same conclusion independently through fiduciary analysis, how many of the 31 companies currently being evaluated will reach the same conclusion next quarter and the quarter after that? When American companies themselves, the institutions that built the American economy, that employed American workers, that funded American communities, conclude that the best place to do business is no longer America, what remains of the claim that the trade war made America stronger? Trump started a trade war to make America the most competitive economy on earth. 5 companies, $73 billion, just voted with their feet. They voted for Canada, not because Canada recruited them, not because Canada offered secret incentives or ran a corporate rating campaign, because the trade war built them a better option. Every tariff, every restriction, every severed alliance, every collapsed framework, every dismantled institution was a brick in the bridge those companies walked across. Washington built the wall, Carney built the welcome mat, and $73 billion chose the welcome mat. And Carney, standing in a city that is now home to 5 more global corporations than it was 6 weeks ago, gave the trade war its most quietly devastating epitaph. 6 words that will be quoted in every boardroom, every investor call, and every economic textbook that tries to explain how the most powerful economy in the world taught its own companies to leave. We didn't recruit them. The math did.